Bully slaps black woman on train doesn't realize she's the police chief's wife. The train rattled through the city's underbelly, its wheels screeching like a cry for help. The carriage was packed, a microcosm of the urban sprawl. People from every walk of life pressed shoulder to shoulder, their faces buried in phones or staring blankly at the flickering ads above. Amara Johnson sat quietly near the window, her dark skin glowing under the faint sunlight filtering through the grimy glass. She was a woman of grace, her tailored coat and calm demeanor hiding a strength forged through years of adversity. At 42, she carried herself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd seen the world's cruelty and chosen to rise above it. Across from her, a young man barely out of his teens slouched in his seat. His name was Kyle, though Amara didn't know that yet. His hoodie was pulled low over his eyes, but the sneer on his face was unmistakable. He muttered under his breath, his words laced with venom, loud enough for the carriage to hear but vague enough to avoid direct confrontation. "People like her don't belong here," he spat, his eyes darting toward Amara. The words hung in the air, sharp and heavy, like a blade waiting to fall. Amara didn't flinch. She'd heard worse. Growing up in a neighborhood where her skin made her a target, she'd learned to let hate roll off her like water. But today, something in Kyle's tone struck a nerve. Maybe it was the way his friends snickered, egging him on. Maybe it was the exhaustion of a long day at the community center, where she'd spent hours advocating for kids who looked like her, kids who deserved better than this. She turned her head slightly, meeting his gaze. "You got something to say, young man?" Her voice was steady, almost gentle, but it carried an edge. Kyle's sneer widened. He stood, his lanky frame towering over her seated figure. The carriage grew quieter, the hum of conversation fading as eyes turned toward them. "Yeah, I got something to say," he said, stepping closer. "Go back to where you came from." The words were a slap in themselves, but then he raised his hand. The crack of his palm against Amara's cheek echoed through the carriage. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A woman clutched her child closer. An old man shook his head, muttering about kids these days. Amara's head snapped to the side, pain flaring across her face. But she didn't cry out. She didn't cower. Slowly, she turned back to face Kyle, her eyes blazing with a fire that made him falter. "You don't know who I am," she said, her voice low and dangerous. Kyle laughed, but it was nervous now, his bravado cracking. "What, you gonna cry to your lawyer?" Typical. His friends chuckled, but the tension in the air was suffocating. The train lurched to a stop, and the doors hissed open. Amara stood, her movements deliberate, her presence commanding. She reached into her purse, and for a moment, Kyle's eyes widened, as if expecting a weapon. Instead, she pulled out a badge, not a police badge, but something else, something that made his smirk vanish. "Amara Johnson," she said, her voice cutting through the silence. "Wife of Police Chief Marcus Johnson. And you just made the worst mistake of your life." The carriage erupted in whispers. Kyle's face drained of color. His friends shrank back, suddenly engrossed in their phones. But Amara wasn't done. She stepped closer, her voice steady but laced with pain. "You think you can judge me by my skin? You think you can raise your hand to me because of where you assume I'm from? I've spent my life fighting for people like you, people who hate without reason, who hurt because they're hurting." Kyle stammered, his bravado gone. "Two didn't mean. You meant it." Amara cut him off. "And you'll answer for it." The doors began to close, but a new figure stepped into the carriage, Justin Tamia Wiry, middle-aged man with graying hair and a worn jacket. He'd been watching from the platform, unnoticed until now. His name was Eddie, a retired teacher who rode this train every day, a silent observer of the city's pulse. He cleared his throat, his voice surprisingly strong. "I saw everything," he said, holding up his phone. "Got it all on video. Ma'am, if you need a witness, I'm here." The crowd turned to Eddie, and for the first time, Amara's composure softened. She nodded, a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. Eddie's unexpected intervention shifted the dynamic. Passengers who'd been silent began to speak up. "That kid's out of line," an older woman said. "Someone call security," a man in a suit added. The tide was turning, and Kyle felt it. He backed toward the door, but there was nowhere to run. Amara could have pressed charges. She could have called her husband, whose name alone would have ensured Kyle faced consequences. But she didn't. Instead, she looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something she recognized: danger born of fear, of a world that had failed him too. "You're not the first to hate me," she said, "but you can be the first to learn from it. Sit down." Kyle hesitated, then slumped into a seat, his defiance crumbling. Amara sat across from him, her voice softer now. "I grew up in a place where people like you called me names, threw bottles, told me I'd never be anything. But I became someone. I married a man who fights for justice, and I fight for it too every day at the community center. You don't know my story, but you judged me anyway. Why?" Kyle didn't answer, but his eyes dropped to the floor. Eddie, still standing, spoke up again. "Kid, I taught for 30 years. Seen boys like you angry, lost. You think putting someone down makes you bigger, but it doesn't. It just makes you small." The train pulled into the next station, and security officers boarded, alerted by a passenger's call. Amara spoke to them quietly, her authority undeniable. Kyle was escorted off, his head bowed, his friends trailing behind like shadows. But before he left, Amara handed him a card, her contact at the community center. "You can do better," she said. "I believe you can." As the train moved on, the passengers returned to their lives, but the air felt different. Eddie sat beside Amara, offering a shy smile. "You handled that with grace," he said. "Not sure I could have." Amara sighed, touching her cheek where the sting lingered. "Grace is all I've got some days," she said. "But it's enough." The carriage grew quiet again, but the moment lingered, a ripple of change in a world too often divided. Amara's strength hadn't just silenced Kyle's hate, it had reminded everyone watching that dignity could triumph over division, that compassion could cut deeper than cruelty. What do you think? Can one moment of confrontation change a heart? Or is justice better served through punishment? Share your thoughts.